interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu. We take you now to Washington.
We were sitting on the front porch, just enjoying the evening, visiting, and somebody that I don't remember who it was came by and asked us if we'd heard, and we said, heard what? And he proceeded to tell us what he had heard over a sketchy little radio that he had.
And on the radio they said the Japanese have done an awful thing to us.
3 or 4 boys were out joyriding that afternoon, and we heard it over the radio.
December, so it was cold, and we were standing in front of the fireplace, warming our hands, whenever it come on the radio that Pearl Harbor had just been bombed.
Well, I was in college at the time, and I was studying that day, and I heard all about it on then, about the attack and who did it and what was going on.
We all stayed in this auditorium, and we listened.
I sat and listened to everything that come on the radio with my grandfather.
I was on my bicycle, riding down the street just after I got through with my paper route. And one of the boys told me.
The kid down on the street was hollering, "Extra, extra, read all about it. Pearl Harbor." So of course I went down and bought a newspaper.
I remember that very well. I was in high school, and it was on a Sunday. And I think it was around about 1 o'clock in the afternoon that we got the news on the radio. And of course, it was a very solemn time. I don't remember just what we did, but we didn't go out and celebrate, that's for sure.
My grandfather was completely upset, very tore up. He said, "We have never done anything to this Japan country. Why did they pick on our island where all of our people was at Pearl Harbor?" And of course, I basically listened to Grandpa talk. He was a very good man.
We had no idea that this was going to happen to us, but it did. So we had to prepare for it.
My brother, oldest brother, Jerry, he joined the Marine Corps right after Pearl Harbor, and I'm talking about a month after Pearl Harbor. And my brother Lee, Jerry was the oldest, Lee the next, and then myself. We worked in the bank here, and one day my brother said, "Aubrey, let's join the Marine Corps." And we did. We just quit right at that point, went up, and I didn't know that I was up for the draft, but whenever I got home from joining the Marine Corps, I had my draft notice.
There was 6 boys living in a private home, and 2 to a bedroom, and this lady, that was her income, the rent from those. And we were from 6 different counties in Indiana. And in February of '43, we all got our draft notices the same week.
I already was married and had this baby, and I was on the deferred list for, otherwise I'd gone in about 1941. But I was deferred on account of being a family man until I was finally drafted in 1943.
And I was deferred because I was a toolmaker, and they converted from over to tanks. They started making tanks. I was deferred for almost a year, 6 months at a time. And then they told me, if you want to be deferred again, which I could have been, if you want to be deferred again, you're going to have to change your position. You're going to have to change it from Indiana to Wisconsin. And I said, well, I just leave go back and go with my own guys if I'm going to go, which was a mistake. I should have stayed and worked. But I could have been deferred, so I didn't volunteer, but then I just gave up being deferred.
I've thought about it later on. I wouldn't have had to go because I was farming with my uncle. I could have gotten deferred. But that was not the mindset of the guys at that point in time. We would enlist and help.
Yeah, I volunteered shortly after. I was 18 years old at the time, and I volunteered because I knew I'd be drafted soon anyway. So if you volunteer, you can kind of pick what service you want to go into. And I picked the Army Air Corps.
I had the same ideas that an awful lot of people had, especially young boys had. They thought that the finest thing in the world would be a pilot.
Well, see, I was in ROTC. That's Reserve Officer Training Corps, I guess it was. And that was the college at Colorado A&M. So they just automatically assumed, well, this guy's going in.
I stopped going to school, and my dad and Grandpa talked together, and they decided that I was a little bit on the wild side and wouldn't listen much to anybody, that it might be a good thing for me to go into service, and I would maybe get straightened up a little bit.
We had the Red Cross lady who came to our hospital and to our nurses class, and she said that we were be graduating the next year, and she said if we didn't sign up to be taken into the service, Wax might pull us into the organization. And we said, no, not on your life. 3 years in nursing school and be put off into a secretarial school. And so we signed up 100%.
Of course, we were all anxious to get to go to war, so we were kind of perturbed at the Japanese at that time for jumping on our boys over there without giving us any kind of warning anyway. So here we went.
At that time they started the draft. So I decided that after eating dirt all my life on the farm, water sounded a lot better than dirt. So I wanted to go into the Navy.
So I decided I didn't want to go into the Army, so I volunteered to go into the Navy.
They were going to draft me, and I decided that I wasn't going to let the Army get me. So I went to recruiters, and they were corresponded with each other, and the recruiter, Army, told me that the Navy had something about the same the Army had to offer. And so I went into the Navy, and I didn't even leave the office till I signed up.
The Navy was the branch of service that I was familiar with, and I wouldn't want to go into anything else. So just before I became 18, I volunteered. I had to get my parents' signature, and I volunteered to go and join the Navy.
I told Grandpa that I was going to go to Phoenix to have Dad sign my papers. I was going into the service. So Grandpa said, well, son, you pay attention to what they teach you. He said, there'll be good stuff for you. I said, okay. But he was a great man. He knew a lot more than people give him credit for. He might have been an old farmer, but he was the best read old farmer there was.
I got drafted into the infantry, and I got sent to Camp Walters, Mineral Wells.
We marched, and did all of that.
It's drilling, and they teach you how to walk. They don't even think you know how to walk. They teach you how to step off.
How to fire a rifle, how to use a bayonet, things that the infantry does, how to throw a hand grenade.
And I didn't like that infantry business.
In the infantry, we just did what we were told to do.
and it's a much different situation in the Air Corps.
I saw on the bulletin board that if you could pass the physical and the mental, you could transfer to the Air Force. I said, that's what I want to do.
I wanted to be a pilot. I was going to fly one of those hot airplanes. But that didn't happen. When I got into basic training and they put us all through all kinds of medical tests and what have you, I was considered too immature. I was 5'4" and weighed 110 pounds. And they thought I was too immature.
We took a test flight, come down and he writes something out and I'm washed out. And this irritated me badly. So that this was almost Christmas time. And I went home from Corsicana over here to Rendon and was telling my dad and mother and dad and everybody about how horrible it was to be washed out. And Dad had been picked up there in Oklahoma in 1916 and was told to get ready to become a soldier. And he said, "No, wait a minute, I'm not going to go kill a man. Cold blood. I'm not going to kill a man." They said, "Well, would you serve in the medical division?" "Oh yeah." So he just served in the medical division in World War I. And so he listened to my foolish ranting and raving about how terrible it was to get washed out. And he said, "Well, son, aren't they going to give you a commission anyway?" "Oh yeah," I said, they want me to be a navigator. They said they'd give me a little test there, and when I did it, they said, "Okay, we want you to be a navigator." I said, "Well, if you're going to get a commission, I believe I'd go ahead and take it." So my stupid ranting and raving was cast aside.
And my experience had been in the ground work, not in the flying. But they looked at me and says, "We've never seen a first lieutenant. Here we've gotten one. We're going to put him to work." So I didn't have too much experience, but they crammed me into work.
When we got our badges, then people started saluting us, which was a thing to get used to, you know. And you had to salute back. And so you almost hated to get off the buses because here we go now. We're a little shy about this.
The very first thing that happened to me was the second day that we was in boot camp. And we was allowed to smoke in the barracks that we were in. This was just one big barracks, and there's probably 25 or 30 of us in the one building. And just all there was beds in there, and they had on posts coming down holding the roof up where they had buckets, gallon buckets nailed onto the wall. That's where you're supposed to put your cigarettes. Well, I made the mistake of throwing one on the floor and grinding it out under my foot. And Chief Petty Officer, who happened to be witness my affair with that, come over and got me by the ear and led me into front of everybody and told me, he said, "You don't do stuff like that in the Navy." He said, "We keep things ship-shape and clean at all times. And get your toothbrush. You're going to brush and clean this whole floor from one end to the other with a toothbrush." I thought, well, this man must be crazy. I said, well, I don't need to do anything like that. I didn't do anything so bad. I don't mind cleaning that up, but why do I have to do the whole floor? He said, so you'll know not to do it again. Well, okay, I learned a lesson right there.
They had put me on the front gate, and I was to check ID. We had a little card, and like people wear nowadays. They don't usually not wear those for 100 years. But we had little ID cards that you wore around your neck along with your dog tags. And anyhow, for some reason or other, I was not notified that some junior admiral was going to come to the base for inspection purposes. Well, I was just like I was supposed to do. I had my gun, had a rifle, and I stood in front of the car and stopped it. You know, I'd done them all that way. I stopped them all, went in there and asked for ID. He didn't have his ID with him. And I said, I can't let you in. The rest of you can go on in, but you need to stand out here and wait for him. And the driver said, well, he's the purpose we're here. They had all kind of conversation going on, so I just buzzed my, the officer that was in charge of me at that time. So he come up there at the gate, boy, he come flying in a little old Jeep. And he went over at that car and he started apologizing. He knew who the guy was. I didn't. I had no idea. All I know is I was supposed to get ID, and if I didn't have it, they didn't get in. So I didn't let him in. Anyhow, this guy apologized, come over and told me that, you know, he's okay. And I said, well, he didn't have his ID. How come you let him in? He said, I know him in person. Anyhow, so that was the end of that. He went on in, and he probably was mad as heck, you know, because he was running a little bit late.
We had different things. I remember I was on the rowing team where we were rowing, and our company won the rowing contest, and we got a 12-hour liberty in boot camp, which was not the usual thing. At the same time, we had my company had been disturbing after taps in the dormitory. It was barracks. It was, we got caught doing this, and so the next day our company commander took us out on the grinder and drilled us for about an hour or two, you know, and the whole company. And he thought he was punishing us, but the commander of the base was in the headquarters hut there. And he says, what company is that? He said, I want them to have a 12-hour liberty. So we had a 12-hour liberty for that, too.
I had to stand guard duty one day on the bow of the ship. And I took my shirt off, and I'm telling you, I got the worst sunburn I ever had in my life. And I had my jacket off about 30 minutes. And that salt water really fixed me up. And then it took a good week for me to get over it. And I wouldn't report it to the Navy because of it's against the law to get sunburned. And so I kept my record clean.
I was sending out these clay pigeons, and one of them must have been cracked because it shattered against the wall. Well, the guy didn't have a clay pigeon coming out, so he fired in the hole. Well, I was looking to see who was coming, and I got a load buckshot right in the chest. It stung.
In the service, everybody goes in town to drink and socialize, have a good time. I never did that. And on the farm, I learned how to ride horses real good. I was a good horseman. And on my time off, I always went to the stable and was riding horses. Well, one day, I was riding a horse down this dirt road, and a little kid, he's probably 15 years old, my wife's brother at the time. He says, hey, soldier, where's your girlfriend? I said, I don't have any girlfriends. He says, hey, I got 4 sisters in the house. Would you like to meet them? I said, yeah. So he went in and brought out one of them, Dorothy. I said, no, can't you do better than that? So he went in and brought out my wife, and now brought her out. She had just washed her hair, was wrapped in a towel, and she looked pretty good. I said, hey, okay.
I had a good friend that had a girl, and I took him up there to see his girlfriend that was going to the university up there. I was sitting out in front in the swing, waiting for him to get through seeing his girlfriend, and this pretty little blonde came trotting out there to me and says, "We going to have a movie Saturday night. My little company is, and I want to sell you a ticket to the movie." And I took another look at her and I says, "I'll buy 2 tickets if you'll go with me." Because she was a beauty. And so I bought 2 tickets and she went with me to the movie.
My brother Jerry was my first sergeant, and he never got over that. To the day he died, he was still our first sergeant. He just built that way, you know, and we didn't mind. We never minded at all. To the day of his death, we felt that he was still our first sergeant. And whenever he wanted something done, "Aubrey, will you do this?" or "Lee, will you do this?" and so forth. And we felt very good about it. We always never resented him in any way, shape, or form. He was a good first sergeant.
We had a general classification test, which got me into, got me into fire control.
They give us all a paper as when we finished basic. We had to fill it out and sign it. And one of the questions was, what part of the Navy would you like to be in? They give us 3 choices. So I put Seabees, Seabees, and Seabees. So I got the Seabees. And that didn't always work that way. A lot of times just out of spite they would do it the other way and gave you something else. But at that time they was needing construction people, and when I told them I drove a truck, well, they thought, well, that's okay for a young kid like him. He's done drove a truck. And I become a truck driver in the Navy.
I was limited service, so they kept me in the United States. As a field artilleryman, I would be probably a forward observer as in active duty in a war zone. And I don't have by vision. I can see one eye at a time. And so it was assumed that I wouldn't be able to tell distances properly, you know.
This chief nurse called me and she said, "Tell your CO that you are to go overseas with 9 other girls." So I go to Major Seaver's office and he grabs a telephone and he says, "You can't take Lieutenant Francis away from me. I get a good nurse and you take her away from me." And she said that those orders came from Dallas 8th Army headquarters. She didn't make the orders. And so, of course, the next morning, 10 of us went to the town and got our training tickets.
We graduated in boot camp in November, and then we trained a little bit with the company.
I wasn't going anywhere, I wasn't going overseas, and I wanted to go overseas. So I signed up to be a tail gunner.
Picked up the first ship at the USS Columbia. Had come in for some repairs.
After the boot training, it was in 1943, they placed me aboard ship, the USS Pennsylvania.
We went out of San Francisco Harbor, and the first thing I remember about that was these going up and down on these waves, and I'm standing up there watching the ship go back and forth, and first thing you know, I'm throwing up over the sea just from the action and the movement of it. But the good thing in life, that's the last time I was ever seasick in my whole life.
They got us ready for Pearl Harbor. And then they sent us to Pearl Harbor. And we stayed there about 9 months. And we helped rebuild it.
I didn't have much training because a couple of months after I joined, we were on our way overseas.
We took off from Norfolk, Virginia, went down through the Atlantic Ocean and went into the Caribbean Sea. And when we got to the Caribbean Sea, we met a fleet of German submarines.
The first, like I say, the first assignment was to photograph Canada, because the German sub action there was knocking out our troops, our ships all up and down the Atlantic. It was a murderous thing because they were deadly.
They were small, but there was a bunch of them, like a bunch of flies. So they attacked our convoy, and for the sake of the Lord, they didn't get none of our ships. And when those depth charges would go off of these destroyers, they're a smaller ship, but they're fast. They'd drop those depth charges for that. It'd go down a certain depth, and boom. And boy, our ship was about a half a block away. And it just shook me like my mom had grabbed me by the collar and shook me for whatever I did bad. And the whole ship was shaking like that. And that old ship was a half a block long or more. Great big old thing. But anyhow, we could see the water churning up with debris, and we know that, that's how many I don't know how many they got, but we got some of them.
When I went overseas, of course we went by boat.
We went by the Ile-de-France ship over the Atlantic Ocean.
I get the joyride on Queen Mary coming over to England.
I was assigned the great duty of being on KP for the whole trip across, and the KP means kitchen patrol.
We picked up our airplane in Kearney, Nebraska. That's where I met my wife. And we flew a brand new plane overseas. I had 36 combat missions. I got shot down on my 36th mission bombing Foggia, Italy. We were bombing a power complex and the railroad terminal in Foggia. Very important for the Germans. Well, we lost 2 motors over the target. And that's why we couldn't keep up with the formation. We dropped the bombs okay, but when we headed home with 2 motors out, we couldn't keep up with the formation. There were another plane side by side that was on our right wing. They lost 2 motors. So the 2 of us backed out, and that's when the German fighter planes, we were sending ducks for them. Lieutenant Bradley was on our right wing. They attacked Lieutenant Bradley's plane first and left us alone. When they shot, they set him on fire. And when he got on fire, he pulled away from us. And one parachute opened up, and the plane exploded, blew both wings off, and the plane fuselage went tumbling end over end and killed 9 of the crewmen. They crashed. Then the ME-109s attacked us. You had 40 or 50 fighter planes. If we were just one plane, we didn't have a chance. So they said we had number 2 and number 4 motor got shot out over the target, and the fighter planes set number 3 on fire. So we were literally flying on one engine. That's when the pilot rang the bailout bell, and we all bailed out. The bombardier's parachute did not open. I found out later on. Then the waist gunner behind me had his right leg blown off, but I helped him out of the plane. We lost 5 planes from our crew, from our squadron that day, which was pretty heavy. And there were so many parachutes in the air coming down. The people on the ground thought we were paratroopers invading. So when I hit the ground, a bunch of civilians were waiting for me, and they started beating me up, kicking your wounds, men, women, and children. The first guy, I was badly wounded laying on my back in a parachute. And the first guy was an old Italian fella. He had a double-bitted axe. He attacked me with an axe. And I managed to grab the axe from him and throw it away. And they kicked your wounds, tried to steal your flight clothes. Then 2 Italian soldiers came by and stopped stopped the beating and took me prisoner. They took me to the nearest hospital, which was about 6 miles from where I bailed out. That's where I met my tail gunner. He was wounded in the head, but they took him to a prison camp, and the other waist gunner and me were at the hospital, and they put him on the operating table. He died on the operating table. Then they put me on the operating table, took shrapnel out of my both legs, bandaged me up, and they fed me some macaroni, and I went to sleep. I was so badly wounded that I never went to a POW camp. I went to a German hospital, and I spent 37 days at that hospital when the 45th Infantry Division shelled it down, captured it, and I was liberated. And when the Italy surrendered, just before the Italians, they just disappeared. My guys disappeared. And that's when the doctor hid me in another room. There was a German captain. They were evacuating so fast, a German captain came in to take me, and the doctor told him they've already taken him. But I was hiding in another room. If he'd have got caught, they'd have killed him. Lying like that. I was so badly, I was still wounded. I could barely stand. Both legs were so bad. And so I looked up out the window, saw a little Jeep, an Army Jeep with a big white star on the hood. Boy, what a feeling that was. Kind of makes you feel emotional, And they come in, how they come in, just like in the movies. I was laying in bed, and they kicked the door. Well, the Italians told them they had an American airman that they were taking care of. And they kicked the door open like in the movies. And they had two GIs. They both had Thompson submachine guns. Who they came in, and I said, Americano,
Landed in England, and there were no barracks or anything, so we had pup tents, because we just arrived and there was two to a tent. I was there 1 week, and then we went across the channel to the invasion Normandy. General Gerhardt, who was the general, wanted us to be on the beach. I think it was either the third, you lost track of time. Either the third or fourth day, he wanted us on the beach by noon, because they were still fighting. There's 10 men to a squad, and they went in with maybe 15 or 16 men, because they figured on losing so many. And I was the one that was probably going to be lost, although I was in the engineers, but I wasn't in the infantry. But the infantry, they went overstocked. And they lost close to, I think 29th lost close to 5,000 on the beach. Our captain didn't even get off of the LCI. He was hit before we even, when they dropped the ramp, he was hit. I didn't know that much because I wasn't trained. The ones that I went in with mostly had been training for months in England before they went in. I had no training at all, except to run. So when they dropped the ramp, we just took off and ran, that's all. And until we could get up close to where they couldn't shoot down at us. Because they were high and we were at a cliff, and it was on Omaha. It was on Omaha Beach. And it wasn't as bad as the first ones. The first ones of the 29th that went onto the beach really had it rough. really. And I'd say it was about as fourth as rough when we went on for firing. And the main thing is to get on the beach, get up near the cliff.
On D-Day, the 9th Division was in England, and they crossed the channel on a few days after D-Day, about 6 days. And then they fought their way on up to where they were when I joined them.
One of the first patients that I got, and was putting him in to his bed. Now this was right after going over to France, across the channel. And this one boy that I was entering, this other lady, excuse me, said, you boys just quit talking about this and forget it. And I said to my patient, if you want to talk, I want to listen. You know, that, and this boy took out of his pocket a little New Testament that we got. They were little white New Testaments. And that New Testament had a hole all the way through. He had an injury on his chest, but he didn't die. It didn't get into the heart. And I wondered about that girl, if she realized what she missed.
After that, we was fighting our way to St. Lo. St. Lo was just, I don't know, must have been maybe 10 or 15 miles out off the beach. And it was a main point, main German point. And it was seeing your buddies, and you knew that it could be you anytime. They were shooting with their 88 cannons plus small firearm. And that's how.
I was tank commander, a gunner. We fought with the infantry. We carried a lot of ammo, and a lot of times those infantry, when they were going the same place we were that they'd ride the back of our tanks, and we'd stay up front and watch other things coming back toward us.
What we did reconnaissance out ahead of everybody to feel out the enemy to see what would take place.
Since I was a long-legged Texan, they made me the first scout. The second scout was named L.B. Smith, and we were walking along. I was out in front, you know, like first scout's supposed to be. And he shot, and it went right by my ear, and I said, "Hey, Smitty, I'm on your side," and laughed. And he said, I looked up there, and there was this German crawling on his hands and knees, and he got behind a tree. So I hit the ground and rolled like they taught you in basic training. Don't stay where you are, roll. So I rolled over 3 times, and right where I hit the ground, a bullet just plowed a furrow in the. So that was a good idea, good training. And I emptied my rifle at the base of that tree that the German crawled behind, and he came out in a few minutes. He had been hit here, and he came out right here. Now, Smitty and I both were shooting at him, and he surrendered.
On the way from Nancy to the front lines, this other guy that was riding with me in the Jeep, it was wintertime, cold, snow. We were riding in the kitchen, called it the kitchen Jeep, up to join our unit. We ran onto a 4x4, or what we called a 4x4. It was an army truck, and they were loading dead bodies on it. And they're out in the middle of a field, and they're just picking them up and throwing them on there like cordwood, one on the head, one on the feet, and throwing them into the back of that 4x4 army truck. Well, this other GI that's with me, he said, "Stop this Jeep." And the driver said, "Well, what are you going to do?" He said, "I don't know, but I'm not going up. I can't go again. I've already been one time and I can't go again." Well, I left a little hollow spot in my stomach. The driver turned around and looked at me and said, "What about you?" And I said, "Well, they told me to go ride with you to where our place was embarking, and let's go." He said, "Okay," so we took off.
In France, I was the special. One boy, it had gas gangrene from a shrapnel entry under his arm, and there was a bag of fluid like this under his arm. They had done 2 incisions and drainage to try to get that fluid out, and the doctors were standing in the hall when I went on duty, and they were deciding whether they would do another I&D, incision and drainage, or if they'd have to take his arm off. And they finally came into the room, the operating room, and said, "We may have to remove your arm, but we're going to try it one more time to drain their arm." And he said, "Doc, I know you docs know what you're doing, but I sure hope you don't have to take my arm off." And I specialed that little boy. He was 19. I specialed him for a couple of months, I guess. He really did appreciate the nursing care. There was a girl who did the 12-hour day duty, and I did 12-hour night duty. And when one day they finally put me on that ward where I was specialing him, and another ward then finally, and then another ward. And when I went into his room that night, he said, it with tears in his eyes, "Lieutenant, I thought you weren't coming." And I said, "Oh, you know I wouldn't leave you without letting you know that." And so finally they let him go to an open ward. And I had a call from him, and he said, "Lieutenant, come to see me." And I went down to that ward where he was, and he did his arms like this. He was so glad he still had 2 arms.
God notified that the Germans were just ahead across in the brush behind where we were. We exchanged grenade fire with them for a while there, and then I realized I'd got hit in the groin with the left leg. I called for the medic. He answered me, and he wasn't too far from him, but he had to have him crawl through the snow and trails to find a way to get to me. And on his way there, he got shot. He got a bullet through both legs. It didn't kill him, but he was incapacitated. That we'd lost our medic right there.
Frenzenberg Castle was right out in the edge of the forest there, and there was a company of German paratroopers stationed there, so they told us, and they wanted us to go up there and guard the 2nd Battalion. We were a 3rd Battalion, and they didn't show up. So we had a gung-ho company executive officer, 1st lieutenant, and he attacked the castle with a couple of guys. When there were 60 of us made the attack, we was there 3 days. There was 13 of us left when it was over. But we took the castle Incidentally, while we were there, the Germans put up a white flag on the truce. We had a chaplain back behind, he was a captain, that spoke German, and they sent him up there to us to go talk to the Germans and see what they wanted. And while the truce was going on, some Germans shot one of their, like our bazooka, similar to that, into a tank destroyer down there and killed everybody in it, except the tank commander. He was out checking the area to see where they need to go. Anyway, during the truce now, and anyhow, we had all these prisoners in that, we put them in a pig pen, and this tank tank destroyer, the guy, he's a buck sergeant, he came in there and, he was furious. And he had his pistol out, cocked it, and he was going to kill those prisoners. And I said, now wait a minute, you don't want to do that. These guys were prisoners, they didn't have anything to do with it. Whoever did that was not, he ought to be whatever, but he shouldn't have done it, of course. But still, these guys didn't do it. It's not, I said, your conscience would hurt you the rest of your life if you shot these down in cold blood just like what they did. So I talked him out of doing it. And he put his gun up and just went over and sat down and just, unhappy, of course. But it was terrible.
We had a lot of people come in on top of it, and some of the guys got outside and was taking their submachine guns, and they're fighting, and one of them got killed, and another one got pretty much killed.
We were going in to take over a town by blowing it up, and it was lined with a trench with Germans, and we got in the trench, and it was nighttime. We got in the trench, and we were going up and down the trench, and we didn't know it, but we was with the Germans in the trench. And all of a sudden, one of the fellows in the squad noticed it, and then is when they started in. And we were forced back out.
The unit I was in was about 200 men. It was down to 7 men fighting hand to hand, getting into Bastogne. I was lucky that I got hit. That I missed that battle because they were either all killed or captured. My unit, the boys I was with.
When we went across the Rhine, we went across at night. In the first 2 weeks, we went across at night, and early morning we come running back where it was safer.
When we got to Remagen, at the bridge there on the Rhine River, we went into a house. It was a 3-story deal, basement and 2 floors. And this German woman welcomed us in, and she had a big picture of Jesus at the head of her stairs up there when we went up the stairs there. And she was glad. She didn't like Hitler. She was glad to see us.
We were inside of the Rhine River, which is crossed over into Germany. We didn't get there, but we were inside of the Rhine River.
They came over and strafed us. One of them did, and a bullet went right down, hit me right here, and came out right here. And it just made a burn down my back. So I got Smitty, that was that second scout, to come look down my shirt collar, and he said, you're all right, just a little red streak.
The bombardier was told that when you get up to a point where it's freezing, when you're going toward your target, you are to run your gates back and forth, back and forth, back and forth where it's freezing, because if you don't do that, it'll freeze. And so what he did during the time that we were flying up toward target one time, he was either asleep up where he was sitting, or he was reading a book or something. And he went through the freezing zone without ever opening the gates like he was supposed to, going through the freezing zone. And it froze up, and we got up to target and started to go on target, and he couldn't get the bomb bay doors open because he'd let them freeze up.
We would, with our bayonets, probe the grounds for mines to make a path for the infantry to go, or for the tanks to make paths. And all we want to do is do and get it done. Scared? Never know. Never know, because, or what's going to happen.
They appreciate you so much. If they nurse it, you look like an angel. And of course we knew we didn't look like angels, but to them, I'm sure that foxhole and us as somebody to help them was quite a different thing.
The Germans, we ran into them up there, we attacked them, and they had a German Tiger tank was sitting up at the end of this street, and he'd fired 88 off his tank and hit that. It was a paved street, and shrapnel just bounced down it. So we went around it and got into a building over there. And while we were there, our company commander came up and called me back. He said he wanted me to go knock that tank out, take my squad and go up this street. And it was no sidewalks, just the buildings were just built straight up on the side of the street, 2-story buildings. And I said, sir, there's no way I could do that. Why? So about that time, that tank shot his 88 down the street, and his shrapnel bounced down, and he said, oh, I see. Just before I went back to the captain, there's an old boy from the States. His name was Seaman. He was a corporal. And why a corporal was after, we didn't have corporals. He was either a buck sergeant, staff sergeant, or tech sergeant up on the line like that. Well, anyway, Tiedemann started to cross this courtyard, coming up to where this little building we were in, and I yelled at him. I said, Tiedemann, there's a sniper in that building right up there. Baloney. About that time, that sniper shot him right here, and he came out right here, just killed him just like that. And I thought, well, when he said baloney, I said, are you crazy? You think I'm kidding? Here we are in combat, and I'm warning you. And do you think it's baloney? But, well, he didn't after that, because he ran, and down he went. After the captain and I had our conversation, I went back up, started back up to my squad. And when I got there, right in the corner of that 2-story building, where the second floor started, an artillery shell came in and exploded and knocked me down, just the concussion of it. And that sniper shot me, and my helmet flew up like that, and that sniper shot me and hit me right across the top of the head there. So I got to go back to the hospital. And a $1 million wound, I called it.
Was sent out on a patrol with the units to see what was in the little town that's down below, whether there's anybody there or what it was. We got right at the edge of it and were fixing to go in and started going through houses. And they showered her from all around us. And we pulled out and went back tried to get back to our unit. And about halfway there, they opened up on us with the mortar shells. And we all took cover in an old barn there. And We just barely got inside the barn and a mortar hit the roof of the barn we were in, and I got a concussion out of that and broke my arm and the left arm and the elbow.
When you're seeing your fella that's doing the same thing you're in, and he gets hurt, certainly we feel bad about it. There's no fun in it, and we didn't ask, do we have to go? We go.
I went on back to a little field hospital, and the doctor surgeon came and sewed up my skull. He put some clamps in it, and then sewed my scalp all back together. They shaved my head right there. And he said, another quarter of an inch and you wouldn't be here. If that'd been a quarter of an inch lower, you wouldn't be here.
And I used to sing to my patients at night when I was on night duty. And I'd say, okay, y'all tell what you want to sing. And then another word, the nurse sent word, her patients were wanting me to come and sing to them. So the next morning I went and sang to them. And my girlfriend had a patient who had, they called it liberated, an accordion from some German home. And so she got that accordion, and to wake the boys up in the morning, she got out there with that outside their door, and then she'd say, "One meatball," and the patients would cover their ears. She was really a character.
So the Germans, Wehrmacht was a regular army like we were, but the SS troopers were the dangerous ones. And you had to be careful in dealing with them.
You know, I was real scared. I'd never been baptized and all that. At that time, I was in combat and getting close. And I went to the chaplain one day, and he said, "All right, just sit down here." And he asked me some questions. I don't know if I believed in Jesus Christ, and on and on and on. Yes, 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 yes. He said, "You're all right. You'll be all right." So I felt real good.
At the time, I guess I wasn't a Christian at that time, but it didn't take long to become one.
I was at a wedding. A beautiful girl and a nice, handsome man. And when I went overseas, I wrote him a letter, the fella. And the letter came back to me from the military saying, so-and-so was killed in trying to do his military mission. So that hurt, because he was such a nice guy, such a good friend. They had such a beautiful wife.
I had an uncle that was in the Army. He went from North Africa, I think, after he got over into Europe, walked all the way into Germany. And like most guys, he would never talk about it. I was talking to him once, and he said, well, the closest I ever came to getting killed was a slug went between him and the strap on his backpack. He was all messed up mentally when he got back, and he married, later on committed suicide.
Oh, Smitty and I were just like that. After I got wounded that day,
They killed him the next day. Smitty got killed, yeah.
I lost 2 buddies. At St. Louis, I lost 2 buddies, and I didn't make any more buddies.
It was Christmas Day of '42 when I was in Panama Canal. And the next day, a cruiser, a heavy cruiser, they had a little airplane on the back that they would launch it, you know, shoot it off of the deal. And how one of those was shot off and it exploded or hit the water for some reason. And how one of the guys died and the other guy survived, so we had a funeral right away. I was ready to come home. I said, man, if we can do it to ourselves, no tell what they'll do to us.
We went to New Zealand first, and we was in New Zealand 5 months, and then we went to Guadalcanal.
We got into a few skirmishes off of the east coast of New Guinea.
Of course, we had a battle station when they, you know, firing the guns or everything. We had to. My battle station was up on top deck.
Well, I was in the landing craft crew, and I was deckhand on captain's gig.
I worked at night a lot of times. I was on guard duty different times.
I was a seaman second class, and just the deck work, and I ran the captain's gig.
Well, the first night over there, it was raining like cats and dogs, and there was no shelter for us, so I slept on a sidewalk. And it just poured on me. Everything I had was sopping wet.
Seemed to me like it rained, just constantly.
I think the first island we went into was Bougainville. First one that I set my foot on shore.
Well, what we'd do was load the ship up with a bunch of troops and take them up to Guadalcanal, where it was. When I went up there, that was the only island that we had really gotten any foothold in, and we had the airport and just the beach, you know, along there. What happened was all the big ships come out there first.
We just set back out the ocean and bombarded the beach, you know, the island.
One of them was an LCR, which usually went along the beach and fired rockets and just set things afire, so that when our boys went in, the enemy was more interested in getting away from that fire and those rockets.
Well, of course, we didn't know about when we was leading them Marines into the beach and all. We didn't know what could happen.
And Guam was, in my opinion, the roughest battle that I was in. We was on the Higgins boats, and at 2,000 yards out, we transferred to what we called the water buffalo, or the tractor. So we went to our beach, and wow, all of a sudden we was stopped because things had got crowded up, and there was mortar shells landing all around us, and fortunately it didn't hit us. Finally got the way cleared, and we got ashore, but that particular portion of the beach could not be secure, was not secured from for some reason or other, they didn't secure it, the infantry didn't secure it. So there we sat, and there was the snipers firing down, and even in the foxhole, one guy got killed there. It took them a good while to secure that, and we watched a company of infantry go up, and they were just being raked by fire, machine guns fire from the Japs up above. They told us we was the last line of defense, and that was kind of scary, I'll tell you for sure.
There was one ship that was sunk while I was there, and it was the USS Penn. And anyhow, that ship went down in 20 minutes. And we fished them all out, and they had me line them up by that little old Quonset hut. It's one of those little round-looking things. I'd go down and check them all and try to, you know, keep them busy. I talk to them, I try to talk to every one of them. Once in a while, one of these guys, they were just wet, coming out of the water, and they just flop over, and I go over and check them, and they were no pulse, nothing. They were dead as a doornail from shock. So, you don't have to get a bullet to die. You get scared enough, and you can die from being shocked, scared to death. That old expression, being scared to death, well, it's true.
We was in a coral, and couldn't dig a foxhole. Well, I kind of set up behind a big log between me and the front lines, and all of a sudden, here comes one of our planes, two B-25s. They're strafing right down the road, and we was right off the road. And so I run for my log cover, and when I did, I slipped on a piece of tree, a sapling there, and I hit Coral on my knee, and it was bleeding and so forth. So I decided to go to the corpsman, go back to the corpsman, and Brother Jerry, he was back there, and of course he saw me coming and scared him to death. He thought his brother had been shot.
We were out one morning on a flight line, and my pilot calls me up, "Hey, Lindy, what are these little clouds here in front of us?" And there was anti-aircraft shots being fired at us down in a place that according to my intelligence reports, there was no activity there at all. But those little clouds were aircraft explosions there all around us. And we didn't pay attention to it, but when we got back home and back to our base, one of the mechanics came in and they showed us where one of those fabric explosions there had missed a fuel line, maybe just a hair off of a fuel line. So this could have knocked us out.
I went to the fleet post office that had been established there in New Guinea. And New Guinea, of course, was not one of our allies because they had, they were a fierce competitor too at times. I delivered something to the post office or picked up something, and I went out to wait for the boat that was supposed to come back and get me, and it didn't come, and that's when I began to realize that I felt safe as long as I was on the ship because it got me here and it was mobile and it could get me home. But if I got stuck on an island with enemies all around me, I couldn't make it. So I didn't like that. I didn't like that feeling at all.
There was a submarine come in, and they had lost a crewman, or he got transferred off, or got sick, or something, and they wanted a small guy. So I volunteered to go to that submarine, get off that darn island, man. Those rivers were flowing red, but anyhow, germs and disease all over the place. So I signed up, and they transferred me to that ship, and I was supposed to get on at about 5 o'clock the next morning, 6 o'clock or something. So I packed all my stuff the night before, and I got up and I went down there to that dock, and that darn submarine had pulled out. So I went back to headquarters and said, "Where'd my submarine go?" And they said, "Well, he got orders during the night, and he's gone." I said, "What am I supposed to do? I go home?" He said, "No, you just right where you were."
We did have a Japanese guy come in and with his hands up in the air, and the island was already secure, but he had been hiding in a cave out in the back and was about to starve to death. And he come in and wanted us to take him in and make a prisoner of war out of him.
The heaviest artillery that we ever fired was on Iwo Jima.
I saw all of Iwo Jima, and our boat that I was on had it was radio equipped and everything, and it was just a small craft, And we led the first wave of Marines into Iwo that went in. There was about 8 LCVPs loaded with Marines, and we'd get into about 150 yards from the beach, show them where to land, and then we'd go back to the ship and get another load.
Iwo Jima was a short battle. It was a very, very fierce battle.
We was floating around the beach out there still. We saw the fellas when they raised the flag.
And I saw it really, I guess, after it went up, but it was a distance where we couldn't quite see the actual raising itself. But it was very prominent. We were very, very delighted to see that.
We had 19 little boats, LCVPs and LCMs on our ship, and we lost 15 boats in that attack in Iwo Jima, but we never lost a man.
There was always a hospital boat in the area anytime there was a group of ships. Well, they had a big hospital ship.
And I'll never forget when we heard that a giant troop ship that had been converted to take our boys back. It was painted white and illuminated, and the Japanese bombed it. And it made headlines, I think, probably all around the world, because it was clearly marked, and there was no weaponry on the ship at all.
They was blowing up everything that they could, shooting everything that they could.
They were indiscriminate in their bombing. In other words, we're concerned and even criticized if one civilian gets hurt. They didn't care. Civilians, little children, women, they were indiscriminate in their killing.
Well, one torpedo hit the rear of the ship, and tore up where the propellers are in the back. And we were bombed. The suicide bombers, they drive right in on the gun turrets, of the ship. Yeah, so we were hit several times.
When we got to Lingayen Gulf, I saw a small cruiser, and I can't remember the name of it. It seemed like it was Columbia, but I'm not sure. But it took a suicide bomber right in the stack, and it couldn't get underway, I remember.
My cousin was in the Navy, and he was in the Pacific, and he was on a destroyer, and the kamikaze plane knocked it out from under him, sank the destroyer. And I had talking to him, and he said, the only thing I got off with was pants I had on and a knife. Everything else was gone.
I was on a ship, got hit by a suicide plane in the harbor of Okinawa. When the Japanese plane struck the ship, I was down about 2 decks below, and as soon as it happened, I saw some shots, heard some shots, looked up, saw the flash of the plane, and everything went over me. They killed the gunner that got to save, and they killed 19 men and officers on that ship.
A suicide bomber came, and he was headed for our ship. And I was on the starboard side, so he was coming from the other way, so I couldn't fire at him, but of course our 40s and our 5-inch gun, they were all trained on this guy coming in. Well, he came down and he missed us. Apparently the fire had kind of, that he was in, facing had maybe damaged his plane. Well, anyway, he came down and he made a great big belly up and landed on the fantail. I think it was APA-3, but I'm not sure. But there was a gun mount on the back of it, on the fantail, and he landed right in the middle of that. And those men were knocked overboard. They were in the water, and you don't realize how fast. We probably were going 20 knots. You don't realize how fast you get past these poor guys that were in the water. I don't know how many of them were dead. I think we tried to go back, sent something back to see if we could find any of those guys, but it just took seconds. When you're going that fast and they're in the water, they disappeared. That was a very sad day.
What they did, they had a ceremony and they'd wrap them in a flag, dump them overboard. They didn't bring them home, dump them in the ocean.
We went down one day, we were walking along on the beach, and out in the water was fairly clear. You could see dog tags of soldiers that had lost their lives. Their dog tags were just laying on the beach. And of course, an 18-year-old kid, I'm not so sure at that point in time realized what all that meant.
Our people that was killed was forward observers, and the guys that told us where to shoot, I mean, they was on the front line, and that was where they suffered.
The only crew that we lost was this one here. It broke my heart because my pilot and I had to sit down and write letters to these people's families.
The Red Cross come in and they called me into the office where Captain Sipley, who actually told me that these were Red Cross, and they was come to tell me that my grandfather had died. And they were real easy with me and, well, treated me like a person should be treated, with all caution. And like I say, I was a grandpa's boy.
Our ship, all the time we was out and all we went through, we lost one man, and that was after the war was all over and everything. We was anchored at some spot out there, and we had about 4 or 5 boats tied up at the back of the boat, our ship, and we kept a night watchman on it all the time. The next morning, when we went down to relieve the man, he wasn't there. He had just disappeared. We never knew what happened to him or whatever.
The guy in the foxhole, we was just sitting there, and I guess, I don't know, we found him dead. He had been shot in the head.
We would capture some of the Japanese, and I don't know what their ages were. I didn't even know how to talk to them. And we had a little pen, maybe as big as this room here. It was all barbed wire all the way around it. They had a gate, they could get them in there and out of it. Marines guarded it day and night. And they'd capture some of these Japanese and put them in there. And the next morning, every one of them was shot dead. Those Marines didn't know what they're going to do with them, but they knew what they were going to do with them. They killed them. And so that's a kind of a horror thing to say. But anyhow, they did. They didn't, when they put them in there, then they never did come out alive. And that happened nearly every day. It's terrible.
We had Japanese while I was on the island come through our lines, and our guys would pick them off before they got to us. And I'm telling you, It's a big thing.
I was never engaged in any of the battles. I don't know, somewhere or another I got to fringe around a little bit and just didn't get involved. So I got in a lot of moving around and so on, but not much, no battles.
Of course, we were lucky. The heavy fighting and stuff was somewhere else.
When they needed an aircraft, they had a crash on a plane, on a carrier or something, they needed a replacement. Well, we had the replacements and send them out, would be assigned there. And so this, we were supporting the fighting, but we weren't in the fighting.
It seemed like our people did everything right out there in the Pacific, or we wouldn't have won.
We were getting the reports of the concentration camps then, and I tried to figure out how on earth they could load up a trainload of people and just take them and dump them in a pit or dump them in a concentration camp and burn, either gas them or burn them. I couldn't comprehend that, and still don't.
The war was nearly over, and when I saw some of those where they'd been dug up, and you couldn't tell them whether it was a man or a woman or what, you know, and it was smelled pretty bad because these had been deteriorated that the Germans had brought in, and I guess killed them, and then put them in a shallow grave.
We was right on the edges of Berlin all the time. But most of Berlin was given up and taken. The aircraft did quite a job on that.
We were headed in toward Berlin. I don't know how far we were, but not a great, that's about 20 or 30 miles out of Berlin, I guess. When the Germans surrendered, we got the message, and some of the Germans over there was giving us a little fit, and we yelled at them, told us the war's over, Hitler surrendered, and they were glad because they'd had it.
Most everyone was relieved, but there was still scatters of firearms because they didn't get the word.
We had a civilian radio we carried on our tank, and where we had electricity, we'd play it, and so we get the news from England, and so we knew pretty well what was going on.
As we sat there waiting to be called to go out and line up and take off, they started flying red bullets right around our plane. And what's going on? They're flying red bullets, and we're just sitting here. And the military war was over for us that particular morning when they flying those red bullets.
This ward boy came to the door of my room, and he was holding up this Star Stripes newspaper, and he ran his hand across the headline, said, "Lieutenant, look, the war's over, war's over." And I said, I was coming out of the anesthesia, I said, "You're kidding me." He said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Well, bring it here. Let me see, let me rub my head over that headline." And so he brought it over there to me, and I said, "You go get another one." This was mine.
It's on all the news, and it was the talk of the town.
It was the time of being glad, or I guess you'd call it. But at the same time, we were fighting the Japanese, and after Germany went down, why then we were fighting in the Pacific.
That ended my war because the war went to Japan.
They rated us by how many battles you was in, and how long you had been in, and what you had done. You earned points, and if you had enough points, you went home. If you didn't have enough points, then you went over to finish off on the other war.
First people out, they had a point system. If you had so many points, you could get out just like that. And at the time, I think we needed 74 points. I had 109, which was very high.
Oh, I had plenty of points. Yeah, I had plenty of points. So I had no trouble going home.
I had two doctors that waited on me. I was their patient. One of them was a captain, one of them was a major. And the captain said, you're going back to your unit, you're fit for occupation duty in Germany. Well, that didn't satisfy me real well, but the major come in later and he said, you don't need to go back to Germany, for occupation duty. You need to go home with that wife and baby. I said, well, you work on it. He said, I will. Well, a few days later, he come into the unit where I was and he said, get packed up and ready to go. Said, Captain so-and-so, whatever his name was, is on leave, and I'm shipping you out here before he gets back.
We guarded the concentration camp there that put German war criminals in there, and that's what we did till the war with Japan ended, and a lot of us got to come home. And that was it.
Oh, a few weeks after the war was over, they wanted to know if I'd like to go back to England and take over a shop there. And I said, no. That was what I was supposed to do in the beginning. I said, no, thanks. I want to go home. So I went home.
At that point, when we left in Lingayen Gulf, we were headed for Japan.
We knew, they already told us, we're going to go to Japan. And just get yourself ready for that, because it's going to be, pretty bloody.
We knew that every Japanese man, woman, and child would be fighting the war.
Well, they're going to be bombing Japan pretty hard and heavy, and when they get them softened up, they'll probably be calling for troops to go in and take them. So it was just something, we thought about.
We stayed there until they dropped those 2 atomic bombs, which made believers out of them. And then the Japanese gave up, and they signed a peace treaty out on the battleship Missouri.
News was that they were going to have the signing and they were surrendering on board ship at a certain date and all this.
I was on the forward deck of the ship, that's the front of the ship, And I remember seeing Douglas General MacArthur on the deck, and when they were signing the surrender, peace treaty there.
The big guys that could sign the papers, they turned Japan over to us. We owned that damn island for a long time.
I'm telling you, there was quite a bit of excitement.
Commander Sipley, who was in charge of our outfit, come over we was sitting down eating, and come out and announced that the war was over, that we had bombed Japan, and Japan had signed a surrender to MacArthur, and everything was over. And we went wild, and they opened up the PX and broke out the beer, and we had a party deluxe.
Harry Truman, who was our president at the time, had okayed dropping those 2 atom bombs in Japan.
And then, of course, he got criticized for dropping that bomb. But what he did was saved a lot of the Japanese people and saved a heck of a lot of us. If we went up there, it's going to be just murder all over this place.
I thought it was a doggone good idea at that time. Yeah.
I think it's the greatest thing that ever happened. It saved 1 million lives because, of course, it killed a lot of people, all right, but it stopped everything. You can imagine about what kind of a mess it would have been when we started dropping that 10th Army on the beach there. They'd have been killing them and everything else. There's no telling how many people would have died before if it hadn't been for that atomic bomb.
I think it was a great idea. In other words, they kept just prolonging it and prolonging it. And evidently something had to happen.
You know, a lot of people won't agree with me, but to me it saved my life because I was just rotated up enough where I was just about to go back overseas at the time of the surrender.
Look at the number of soldiers that have been killed if it had just kept going, and not only ours, but theirs. And I think that it was a wise thing to do. However, I think what we need to do is make sure we don't have any more wars. Let's get people talking to one another and stop that kind of stuff.
You know, I was sorry to, to hear about the bombing, but, like to say that was probably what ceased the war.
I think if they had known all of the ramifications that it would bring, that they may have gone a different route, but at the time, it was the thing to do.
I mean, it's hard to go that way, but it was hard for us to take whenever they came to see us at Pearl Harbor, too.
After the bombing, our ship was, out there, so we went ashore, at those places, and just to look at them, Well, there was nothing left there. It was all just flat ground. All that was left was some steel beams where the buildings were standing, and just the steel beam would be sticking straight up in the air, And there was, trash and metal and stuff on the ground, So there not very many people around. Nobody, there was no Japanese or anybody around, no.
We almost immediately went into decomposing the unit.
When the war ended, they just almost shut down, almost didn't do anything.
After the war ended, they discharged a whole mess of us guys for the convenience of the government or something like that.
And all of us had enough points. They were discharging the people on you had to have a certain amount of points to be eligible for discharge. And we all had enough points.
I was in for 3 years because that's what I signed up for, the minority hitch.
My contract with the Army, if you can call it a contract, was end of the war plus 6 months possibility. So I signed up and got out.
World War II really made this country.
It's hard to say that wars created us a better country, maybe, but something did.
We lost a lot of men, true, but as far as the country, it helped the country, I think, a whole lot.
It's just a wonderful place to come back to, and jobs was plentiful. Even with all the soldiers coming back, everything, when the boom was on.
There was no thought in my mind as to it being a different world than it was before the war. It was just a question of getting adjusted to the new world, period.
So people started kind of pursuing their thing rather than trying to, get the war over and so on and so forth. Now that thing had disappeared.
It's a wonder I didn't become a nervous wreck after that, but I didn't.
But it's scary, but you know, you get over it in a way.
I just tried to forget it all. I'm getting along fine.
I just don't like to hear about it.
You know, I've had so many close calls and still made it through. I was just thank God every day that I did it. I made it. Yeah.
I still wonder why I'm here at 93. That's what I can't figure out. And I don't guess I need to. I guess that's somebody else to figure out.
There was a feeling all along that somehow or another I was in one of those select groups of people that the Lord actually had a hand on my action.
I'm so proud of the fact that I was a Marine, and so proud of the fact that my brothers and myself served together. Truly, that's a real highlight.
My generation was it was very special.
We just helped each other, and that's it. We had to support each other, or else it was hard to do it on your own.
You know, we were a group of guys that wound up being a family. And these older guys, there was 5 of us younger guys in there, but these older guys, we were their boys.
They'd do everything they could do and shoot a leg off if it took it that much, and then they'd go as far as they could go.
We learned a lot. I'm sure we all grew up by going to the service.
I don't remember standing around talking about what we did in the war, because everybody had some kind of a story, went a different direction maybe.
I really truly wanted to deploy, but it's just part of life that didn't come along.
I've never been back to another war. They'd had to drag me with grappling hooks or something.
I wouldn't want to do it again.
But I wouldn't want to go through it again.
So I just feel like that I was doing my duty and that I was not there of my choosing, and I accepted the situation for what it was.
I done my job, and I've done it well. And I just am proud to have been service to my country.
Well, I don't consider myself a hero. I was just doing my duty, I'd say.
I'm not a hero. And the people I knew didn't think you were heroes. We came to do a job and did the best we could do. We lost some guys. But I never thought about being a hero.
Nobody wanted to be a hero, but there were. It just fell on them, more or less. They were caught and they did what they did.
I think the heroes are the ones that are buried.